Back to the Donkey Vibe podcast, and today with me, along with Ryan and Francis, we have a special guest with us from the Legalized Cannabis Party, David. David, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to be with you today.
So for the audience who can get a better understanding of who you are, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I'm David Ettershank, and I'm a member of the Legislative Council. That's the upper house in the Victorian Parliament, representing the Western Metropolitan Region on behalf of Legalized Cannabis Victoria.
So we'll get started with the questions now. So I have the first question. How was your high school life and university life? Do you have any memorable moments?
Yeah, look, I went to pretty rough sort of a high school, Southport State High on the Gold Coast. So that was an interesting experience. Character forming, I think, would be the term, perhaps. And then from there, I went on to study Asian studies, majoring in Chinese studies at Griffith University. But I must say, whilst I entered university with the intent of going into the diplomatic corps, joining foreign affairs, I sort of got addicted to student politics and the civil liberties and the anti-uranium struggles of the time. And I must admit, my most memorable memories of university were probably wagging it and getting involved in street marches and political actions.
So you went to a lot of political rallies back in would that be the 1980s and 70s, or would that be?
It was. Yeah, I went to Griffith. I started at Griffith in 77, I think it was. And yeah, the civil liberties movement was the right to march. The Joe Bajilki-Peterson government made it sense to or two or more people to gather without a permit. And that was designed to crush the uranium movement. And then the right to actually demonstrate became a huge thing. And there was just, we would have monthly rallies with anything between, I think at its highest, there was about 600 people arrested on one day. But it was pretty common to have a couple of hundred people arrested every time. And yeah, they were pretty full on. The Queensland police did not like protesters. And it's not like here where they sort of guide the traffic for you. And occasionally get a bit grumpy. I mean, they used to just take to the protesters with batons, and it was full-on physical contact. So it sort of changed the generation in Queensland, and I was one of those that decided that democracy is worth fighting for. And I think I racked up about a dozen arrests at the hands of the police in 18 months. But it was a good campaign.
It was worth it because I think the Joe Bajilki-Peterson government was probably one of the most corrupt governments in Australian history, correct? So
yeah, absolutely, and one of the most corrupt
20 years or so as well. Yeah.
When the Royal Commission was finally held down, it was like the Premier, the Commissioner for Police, they were all taking literally brown paper bags of money from developers and others. It was so corrupt, and it just gravitated down through the structures of government. It was pretty ruthless stuff. And there was a number of us, we copped pretty good beatings at the hands of the police when they couldn't stop the marches. They sort of took to more aggressive and damaging approaches to people. But yeah, that's what it's about.
Yeah. I believe now I have the next question. So, what made you run in the 2022 state election, and what made you join the Legalized Cannabis political party?
I'm probably what you would call an accidental parliamentarian. So I'd been a partner in a small consulting firm in aged care for 20 years. And my business partner and I were getting a bit sort of like need a change. And a friend of mine sort of approached me and said, Legalized Cannabis is looking for candidates. And you've been involved in local politics in the West here for a long time. Would you like to have a shot, or would you like to be approached and interviewed? I thought, yeah, could be fun, could be interesting. At least I'll add running a political campaign to my CV. And yeah, so I got pre-selected for the Western Metro region, and I think 2 weeks after I was pre-selected, the early voting centres opened. So we didn't have a lot of time to prepare, and we didn't have much money at all either. But that's just the way it works. And legalized cannabis, you know, I mean, its name is on its tin, but at the same time, you know, we like to think that we are able to address a broader range of social and political issues, and we seek to do that as well.
Yes.
Did I
Yes.
answer your question there? Sorry.
Yeah, a little bit. But was it mainly just the legalized cannabis movement that kind of like that specific issue that made you go and run for the legalized cannabis party, or what was the main reason why?
That you've pulled me back to the point very well there, Francis. Look, I mean, I've been a consumer of cannabis for 40 years. I guess to my mind, I have this abiding dislike of the fact that cannabis is a criminal offence. You know, to my mind, it's a drug. It's less harmful than tobacco or alcohol. And the fact that what I do as a sort of middle-class white Australian in my backyard, in terms of having a joint or a vape and committing a crime, really sticks in my craw. So I guess that was sort of a factor that, having been through using cannabis for both recreational and therapeutic purposes, the fact that every time I did it, I was a criminal, was really a key factor. So when that opportunity presented itself, I didn't expect to get elected, but I thought, well, let's get out there and use the election as an opportunity to sort of politicise the issue. And both myself and my friend Rachel Payne got elected to the upper house. So that was nice. It was unexpected and a great privilege, but yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's nice.
So I'm guessing, yeah. You can go first, Ryan.
Oh, yeah. Because wanted to add to that point because I think there are like several conditions that can be treated with medical cannabis and all that, but it's very hard to access because of these restrictions. And these have proven to work, and obviously, you know, trying to get people to be able to access them is a lot of work, and that might be troublesome for, you know, these people that need it. That's what I've heard. So
yeah, no, it's a really good point, Ryan. I mean, because cannabis has been prohibited for 95 years, you know, they're still learning a lot about what it can be, you know, what you can do with it. But clearly, it does good things for a lot of people, and there's plenty of peer-reviewed science to support that. And of course, you've actually got a couple of cannabis products that are actually on the TGA, you know, so they've got through that whole process as well. What medicinal cannabis brings is relief to a lot of people with chronic pain, endometriosis, sleeplessness, anxiety, different conditions. The thing to bear in mind, though, is that what's sold through the current TGA approved processes and through the dispensaries is but a small fraction of the amount of cannabis that's used for self-medication purposes. So it's a huge market, but a lot of people can't afford medicinal cannabis. You know, it's typically 50 to 100% more expensive than what people can get on the illicit market. And so one of the things that we're pushing on is the idea of a compassionate scheme to allow people who can benefit from medicinal cannabis to access it, and also to remove some of the discriminations that exist in the system. Like, for example, the ability of people who are on medicinal cannabis to be able to drive. And that's a really big issue, because cannabis alone is treated in the Road Safety Act differently. So I can take opiates or diazepams or whatever I like, and so long as I'm not impaired, I can hop in a car and drive, and I can do that perfectly legally. With cannabis, if I've partaken and I get road tested, I'm guaranteed to lose my license, even though I've got a script from a doctor that says this is my medication, because the law just discriminates against medicinal cannabis patients in that particular regard. And that's a big issue, because cannabis can stay in your system and be detected for up to 30 days after you've had it. So whilst it should be about impairment, the fact of the matter is, in the case of the Road Safety Act, it's all about the presence of cannabis or THC in your system, not the actual impairment of your driving. And that's something we've been campaigning very hard on since we've been in Parliament.
Yeah. All right. So
Yeah, that was.
I believe, yeah. I
I
believe
was
the
just.
next question. So what is it, Francis? Yeah, you go.
Yeah, that was one of the points I was going to raise as well, because for a lot of people, I know there's a lot of people out there who are still pretty skeptical on cannabis, especially when they look at America. You know, they see a lot of the drug problems that are there. So there are a lot of people that I know, even initially, even a lot of young people as well, who are pretty skeptical on the legalization of cannabis. So I was going to raise that point as well.
Look, I think it's really appropriate to be skeptical. I think it's actually appropriate to be skeptical about everything, including anything that's being offered by way of drugs. That's not to say that there's not great merit in it as a drug, but then it's like any medication or any chemical, it's going to work differently on different people. So if it works for you and it helps you with your PTSD, for example, then that's fantastic. You know, and if it's been prescribed by a physician and there's appropriate oversight, well, that's an optimal position. But the fact of the matter is that it's not a level playing field, and there is clearly a high level of discrimination against people who use cannabis. So, for example, we'll shortly be starting an inquiry in Parliament covering workplace drug testing. Because we've had so many stories of people who've gone to work, might have had cannabis on the Friday night, might have had some weed on Friday night, turn up at work on Monday, impairment-wise, 0. But they get drug tested at work and it finds a presence, and the next thing they know, they're being performance managed out or sacked. And we've even had that happen with people who've gone to work and said, I'm on medicinal cannabis to their employer, and then they've declared it. And as a result of that, they've been terminated or performance managed out of the organisation. So a lot of what we're focusing on at the moment is trying to end some of these discriminatory practices against cannabis consumers. We're not saying, we don't have a messianic vision of cannabis. We're not saying it's for everyone. We're not saying it doesn't have health risks associated with it. What we're saying, though, is that those should be managed appropriately, as we would any other medication.
Yeah, I think that is an important point as well, because as you said, cannabis in general has a pretty, compared to other drugs, the effects are pretty limited compared, to methamphetamines and that sort of thing. So it's a good point that you do raise there.
Yeah, if you look on the table of harms, you've got tobacco and alcohol, opiates, methamphetamines and such like it. You go a long way down to find cannabis, And in terms of impairment, say, for example, for driving, alcohol's way up here. Cannabis is like, well, for a lot of people, and it varies from person to person, but it's typically a 10 milligram, a nanogram sort of THC intake. So what a person would typically get out of a decent joint, let's say, is probably not going to impair you much more than just taking a couple of antihistamines, which you can buy over the counter at a chemist shop. and it would equate to maybe 0.02 or 0.05 by alcohol reading. So it's not this terrible bogey that it's been made out to be, but it should be dealt with in an appropriate framework from a regulatory point of view, and that's what we're arguing for.
I think we'll move on now to the next question. So Ryan.
Yeah. So David, you used to work as a training and industrial officer across Australia. Can you talk briefly about the initiatives that you were involved in during this line of work?
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. So after I graduated from uni, I sort of was fairly heavily involved in local politics and the environmental movement. I got into the trade union movement, which proved to be an enduring love. So I worked in the union movement for 20 years. Always in sort of grey collar unions primarily. So the liquor trades unions, which covered like hotel and hospitality workers. I worked for the health services union here in Victoria, and I worked for the Trade Union Training Authority for a long time as an instructor there, and that was terrific. That was magnificent. I had because I was the single man in the office. I had a stretch that went from Rockhampton north to Torres Strait and then out to the Northern Territory. And so anywhere where there was 20 union people, shop stewards that would like to have a discussion and work up their politics and work out their organising skills, I'd just drive there or fly there, and we'd run workshops. And it was spectacular. It was really good, and it taught me so much about both what it is to be committed to your job and to the people you work with, and it also provided me with a great opportunity to develop skills in communications, which I've employed pretty much continuously since then. So yes, I enjoyed the trade union movement a lot, and was involved with some great struggles to try and advance the interests of working people. Yeah.
Just touch on a point before. I think you did say before you went to high school in Southport. What made you move to Victoria? Was that more related to the trade union movement, or?
Yeah, I was working in the Liquor Trades Union in Queensland, and my wife got a job with Fletcher Jones down here, running their corporate apparel section. So we sort of had 12 months of long distance relationship, and then at the end of it, thought, oh well, come back to Melbourne. And I'd lived in Melbourne for a while when I was younger, so it was, oh yeah, let's go back to Melbourne and check it out again. And that was 30 years ago, and no regrets. I love Melbourne. I love Victoria. It's a great city, Melbourne. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I have to say also, at the risk of being a bit shitty, but 30 years ago, Queensland was pretty redneck at the tail end of the government. So it was pretty racist, very Anglo-Celtic. And it's come a long way. It's come a huge way since then, but there were a lot of Queensland lefties who all sort of declared themselves to be political refugees and moved south to Victoria to find a bit of progressive politics.
Glad you picked Victoria as the state you want to live in, David.
Yeah, me too. I do love it. I do love it. And my community, I love my community in the inner west. Like the western suburbs of Melbourne are just the best. It's so diverse, so interesting, and it's so underserviced. Like it's just, we say, which is the west is the best, but it gets so much less. Whether it's health services, education services, transport services. So a lot of my work at the moment is just trying to get the West to get its fair share of resources from the government.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. Because I'm right now actually at the local bus stop, and the bus should be coming in about 3 minutes, but I don't see it. So our services here aren't really the best.
Yeah. Whereabouts are you, Francis?
the bus is actually here now. I'm actually in Point Cook, so just on Boardwalk Boulevard. So
Yeah.
the 495 is the bus I take.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look, we're running a big campaign about buses in the West, because it's just atrocious. You've got people. I was out at Mount Atkinson, sort of out back in sort of Tarneet there, and it's a 40-minute walk along a non-paved road to get to the bus stop. So you've got to walk for 40 minutes just to get to the bus. And in doing that, you've got to do 2 roundabouts. You've got to walk across 2 roundabouts, and you've got to cross the Western Highway to get to the bus stop. So it's not for the weak at heart. And it's just, to my mind, outrageous, because what it means if you've got no access to public transport, is and you're in the outer West, you've got to have 2 cars. If you're a family, you've got to have 2 cars, and that comes with huge cost. It's environmentally totally inappropriate, when we're trying to reduce our impact. And so public transport, to my mind, isn't so much a public service as a sort of civil right. Everyone should have access to safe, affordable public transport. And in the West, it's just not the case, and that needs to change. Nice looking bus in there though, Francis.
Yeah, I just hopped on, so I'm just heading to the station. So this will be probably like a 10-minute bus ride or so. There's not traffic in the morning, so normally it's pretty traffic. Coming out of Point Cook, I think you've heard about the whole traffic issues here. It's really bad, but right now it's not too bad.
Yeah, good.
Just on the bus right now.
All righty, what do we got next?
Who's got the 4th question?
Yeah, I've got the next question.
Yeah.
So my question is, so David, you're a distinguished entrepreneur co-founding a startup called Outcomes Plus. Can you briefly talk about what Outcomes Plus is?
Oh, I don't know about distinguished entrepreneur, but thank you for that, George. Yeah, after I spent 20 years, as I said, in the trade union movement, and after 20 years, I reached a point where I was sort of burned out. I think basically I needed something different, and I think it's really important we always know when it's time to move on. And I'd reached that point in the union movement, so I just sort of started, and I've been getting more and more into vocational education and training in my latter period with the union movement. So I thought, oh well, I might just set up, I might just go consultant. So this is a little bit over 20 years ago. And I thought I might just go consultant till I can get a proper job. And I really liked it. And I was working primarily in aged care. And I sort of worked out pretty quickly that it's a good idea not to work for assholes. So it was trying to find, the not-for-profit sector was a good fit. And there was a lot of problems in aged care then, as there is now. So about 20 years ago, I was involved in setting up a partnership with a very dear friend of mine, Ken Ridgewell, called Outcomes Plus. And for 20 years, we literally just did all sorts of really interesting work in aged care, from organisational change through to building nursing homes. I mean, that was an incredible buzz. So really enjoyed that, did that for 20 years. And we sort of got to a point last year where it was, what do we want to do next? It was our 20th anniversary. And that's when I got tapped for legalized cannabis, got elected to Parliament. So my business partner, Ken, was a very kind and generous man. And he went, yeah, okay, well, you got elected to Parliament. Well, I guess that's time to move on. And that's what we've done. But it was great fun, and I met it was a lot of challenges and a lot of wonderful people in aged care. People who just turn up every day, who just do work that's really demanding both emotionally and physically. And I have nothing but admiration for those folks who deliver those services to some of the most vulnerable people in Australia. So it was great to work with them. I think I'm a bit rambling.
No, it's fine. It's fine. The longer this interview goes for, the better. So, yeah, I'll now move on to my 5th question. So, David, you've also been a long-time community activist. So what haven't you done at this point? Campaigning against the East-West Tunnel project and campaigning for the redevelopment of the Kensington public housing estate. What initiatives outside of legalizing cannabis are you hoping to implement as a member of the Legislative Council?
Yeah, look, I mean, yeah, I guess I spent about 10, 15 years as secretary or the president of the local residents association. And you know, it was important to hold the ground against some of the developers and to work with different stakeholders to try and, as we said, protect and advance the amenity of the neighbourhood. In terms of now being in Parliament and having a bigger stage, I guess, a lot of the principles are probably the same. You know, it's about the importance of community. It's about safety in the community. It's about recognising that people have certain rights to services, whether that be health, education, transport, and we've talked about transport already. And so to the degree that Parliament may give me some ability to try and help people across the West, I guess that's what I'm keen to do. And that's what we've sought to do, to engage with a range of stakeholders to pick up and advance certain issues, a lot of which have to do with, I suppose, social equity and community resilience and well-being.
Yeah, but there's you want to go first, Ryan, or do you want me to go first? Ryan, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first? Your point.
Yeah, you can go if you have some comments about that, because I think it's a very interesting point.
Yeah, because you know, a lot of the projects we said, like the East-West Tunnel project, it was, I don't think it was necessarily hated on in the West, but maybe in our part, I know probably in other parts as well, a lot of people were talking about how it wasn't a very necessary project. So, you know, you campaigning on it really did show a lot of political activism and that sort of thing, even when you weren't a member of Parliament. So it kind of does show that you don't have to be a member of Parliament to push, you know, the needs for your community.
Yeah, I mean, look, on East-West Tunnel, I mean, I've been living in Kensington now for close to 30 years. And we have one park, you know, one decent-sized park, and that's Holland Park. And for the East-West Tunnel, the Western Portal, as they called it, was our park. Like, it was Holland Park, which was, you know, as I said, one, you know, significant recreational space, and it was going to be 6 to 8 lanes of open cut tunnel through there. And so you know, and everyone was absolutely outraged, and even to the point where they said that so that well, I think basically to cheapen the project, if they would just cut into the hill on the park, and it would all be open. They wouldn't try and enclose it. And I remember when it came out and it said they were going to use this open cut approach to enhance the driving experience. You know, so we were going to have, like, lose the only decent park we had with that enhanced driving experience. And everyone was like really outraged. And so we ran good campaigns. We hooked up with other communities along the way that were also in the route of that. And I think it was a very successful campaign when, you know, the incoming Andrews government ripped up the contract that the previous Liberal government had signed, knowing that there was a dog of a project. It was just, you know, they signed that contract so the Labor government would have a poison pill to take. And that was just doubly annoying, I think. So, yeah, it was a good campaign, and local politics is really important. You know, I would encourage your peers, you know, who want to get involved in politics to start, you know, start at a local level, start with the school strikes, you know, start with whatever you can get your hands onto, and just learn about politics, learn about how to organise, learn about how to communicate. And the fact that you're doing exactly this sort of podcasting stuff is terrific as well. You know, that's a great way of demonstrating political activity and social consciousness.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. Most of the time, a lot of young people, they are pretty disenfranchised with politics, especially, you know, they see a lot of politicians being, you know, 60, 70-year-old white men who don't really understand their issues. So I think it is really important that young people get involved and do that sort of thing, and get out there, even if it is going to a climate protest, or if it's just doing a podcast, or anything, just try and get yourself involved. Even join a young political party, young Liberals, young Labour, young Greens. Is there young legalized cannabis?
Well, that's a bit of a tender one for us. So no, we don't have a youth wing, if I could put it that way. That said, we do support appropriate education. There is stuff around cannabis and the young mind. So we're not advocating for access to cannabis for people below the age of 18. And I know there are some students I've met who think that's a bit sort of sucks. But yeah, I mean that's sort of what's in the literature at the moment, in terms of cannabis and young and developing brains.
Exactly. It's a pretty good point that you raised. We'll now move on to the sixth question.
Yeah. So I'll read it out. So, David, who would you say is your political role model or idol?
Oh, that's a really hard question.
Like,
I've seen lots of people. It's sort of like the problem isn't finding sort of role models or heroes. It's trying to capture them in the time frame that we've got available, because they're everywhere. And so I look around, and throughout my life, I've been fortunate enough to meet and work with a range of people that, whether they're in the industrial area or First Nations area or environmental struggles, who are out there, on the front line. I go back to people like Jack Mundy and Joe Owens, who led the Green Bands in New South Wales in the 70s. I mean, the fact that there's Paddington and there's cultural heritage, architectural heritage in Sydney was basically due to the Builders Labourers Federation and their struggles around the Green Bands. You look within the First Nations, and there's a whole lot of activists within that organisation, going back to the Borders through to people like Marcia Langdon or Pat Dodson today, who they're just inspiring. They're inspiring because they've fought and they've struggled for decades, and they keep going. And then I guess the other one is that, in terms of heroes, and I might have alluded to this before, but to my mind, there's the real heroes in our society are the people who work in essential services. Whether they're whether they're healthcare workers, aged care workers, whether they're fireys or ambos or teachers, they're people who turn up day after day, and they do the hard work, and they do the often unrecognised and often underpaid work that keeps our society going. And they're the real heroes, and when you get things like the pandemic, suddenly just how important the role of health workers are in our society became apparent. And so, to my mind, it's the people that turn up and turn out and do the jobs that keep our society going every day. They're the heroes. They deserve to be recognised and paid better for what they do. That was a bit of a long answer. I'm sorry, Ryan, but
so yeah, it was a very detailed answer. I think you made a lot of good points there, actually. Yeah, that the hero is more than just one person. So it's our community that keeps everything running. It's kind of important to recognize that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for for people who are leaving the workforce, leaving the school system and trying to work out where to go, what to do, I think those professions are obviously very often underrated. And I think there is a concept in terms of social merit and in terms of personal social reward for doing things that are of value to the society. It's just that they tend not to be recognised, particularly remunerated well. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be aspirational for people. You know, what do we do without teachers? What do we do without health workers? You know, we would be a much more poorer society if we didn't have those folks. So they're heroes.
Yeah, just to raise a point as well that you brought up a lot of Indigenous activists. Hopefully you can hear me right now because I'm right next to the freeway. But my grandparents are actually good friends with one of the Indigenous activists, Howard Blair. If you know Howard Blair, he was a former Indigenous singer. He has an electorate in federal parliament named after him. So, my dad did spend a bit of time with Howard Blair, and there's Indigenous activists that you talked about, Tad Thompson, even Linda Burney nowadays. Like, they're so important for our society, especially to recognise all of the Indigenous injustices that they have faced in the past and to work towards reconciliation and better outcomes for Indigenous people towards into the future.
Yeah, I mean, you look at somebody like Eddie Mabo, you know, the Mabo decision. I mean, he was a working class First Nations person living in Townsville and up on in the Strait and traveling between the two. But he sort of maintained this battle for the rights of his people for more than 20 years.
So just to continue your point, David, that you left us on.
Oh, I think I was just talking about people like Eddie Mabo, who were ordinary working class people who mobilised around issues and showed determination, and in his case, over 20 years of being the absolute underdog, being supported by a few members of his community, and I think some of the left in Townsville and in North Queensland, made history in terms of the Mabo decision in the High Court that removed the concept of terra nullius and opened the way for a whole lot of recognition of prior occupancy. So those sort of people are heroes, I reckon, and great models to aspire to.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there. A lot of those guys did so much for Australia in general, so they really should be appreciated and talked about a lot more in the political scene, 100%. So we'll now get on to our last question, just because I'm mindful you have to leave us at 9:50, so we only have 5 minutes. So we'll quickly get on to the last question. I'm George.
Yeah. So the last question is, finally, what's one piece of advice you would give to students in 2024, especially those who are entering university or high school?
Oh, yeah. Can I say, when I was a student of your age, the last thing I'd do would be listen to an old white bloke tell me what was my best advice. So from that hypocritical footprint, I guess I'd say to school people leaving school and heading into higher education, demand more. Don't be afraid to be loud. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to demand change. That you are going to inherit this world. You are going to be, responsible for its management in the future. And clearly, there are a lot of things in our country and in this world that are going wrong, whether it be through climate change, whether it be reconciliation with First Nations people. And so to young people, I say, fight, demand, be skeptical, be critical, be loud. You have a right to participate in this democracy, and you need to use it. You need to exercise that right and demand better from your politicians. There is a real truth that you get the politicians you deserve. And if people aren't up there shirt-fronting politicians demanding better from government, then they won't get it. And it's to the young people that you pass the baton. You're the voice. You're the ones who will inherit and will manage this country. So the sooner you start to learn the political skills, get involved in political activity, learn how to organise, learn how to communicate, then the better. And every strength to young Australians to do just that, to demand better, to get better, and to make this a better country. That would be my advice.
Great advice, Ben. it was more than one piece, but we'll take it there. That's brilliant advice.
Yeah, sorry about that. I got on the soapbox a bit there, but never mind.
It's totally fine. You know, we've got to 15 minutes, and this is a great interview so far. So we really appreciate you going along and expanding all of your topics. A lot about yourself a bit more. So yeah, it's been great. So I think that's all our questions. George, do you want to do the outro?
Yes, thank you, David, for taking your time and doing this interview with us. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been great talking with you, and I wish you every success into the future.